The Tight Five.
Martin Devlin, Lachlan Waugh, iOS. It's only sport with the Rugby World Cup. Operation Napoleon. Thank you very much to everyone again that has contributed. I can't say thank you too many times. We're humbled, we're overwhelmed by the fact that it's you, the platform family, listeners, sponsors, clients that have dipped into your pockets to get me and Lachlan here to bring you the Rugby World Cup. All Blacks, of course, into the semi-finals against Argentina, and that game is Saturday morning, New Zealand time. The following morning, England versus South Africa. That is a repeat of the 2019 final. If you want to follow us on social media, it's easy. At the platform _NZ, that's on Twitter. Myself, Martin Devlin NZ on Twitter. Instagram, Martin Devlin Sport. All the interviews throughout the day on the platform are available across the YouTube channel, Facebook. You know how this all works. One of the regular features of our program, iOS, is called The Tight Five, and this is where we just tackle 5 sporting topics du jour. You see, I'm so Parisian now. I have been on the ground since nous arrivés. I know that Miles is just sitting there listening to this going, you absolute tosser. But you got to do a little Francais millet when you get into this place. A bit of bonjour, a bit of je ne sais quoi, a bit of comme ci, comme ça, a little bit of tout le touche pop too. Look it up. Translate it for yourself. 5 topics today, all geared around, of course, the Rugby World Cup. Last night at Stade de France, the French-South Africa semi-final, and just the atmosphere at that stadium for those 2 quarterfinals that we were at, New Zealand, Ireland, and South Africa, France. Are things going to deflate a little, atmosphere-wise, now that the hosts are out of this tournament? The refereeing performance from Ben O'Keefe and the Kiwis last night, Justin Marshall has commented on this already on the program. I concur with Justin. At first, I don't know. At first, I was thinking, no. I thought Ben O'Keefe had an average game, but now, actually, when the perspective is put on it, I want to talk about that. There were instances during the game that the French are very upset about. What losing team doesn't moan about the ref? Argentina and England. Now, the feeling is, and make no mistake about this, and we can't deny it, that I think most rugby fans have already decided that it's a repeat of the 1995 final, South Africa versus New Zealand. Well, I'm sure that Argentina and England have got a fair bit to say about that. Plus, the presses that we went to today, Jason Ryan, Dane Coles, and Ethan de Groot, openly, the mood, the mindset, and what they're calling the reset ahead of the semi-final. Let's kick it off what we saw last night, French time, Lachlan. You've been only to 2 Rugby World Cup matches, both of them quarterfinals, both at the Stade de France. Did you ever think that the atmosphere could be bettered after the Ireland-New Zealand match? There's something about it when the hosts are in town. And that crowd last night, from the moment the Marseillaise gets sung, the jumping and the bouncing, it actually hooked you when the team was announced.
Yeah, when they were announcing the team before the game, and the way the French fans belt out the surnames of the players when the announcers, the PA's saying them, and then the French, pretty much scream the surname of the players. It's incredible. I've never seen anything like it in New Zealand, of course. I love the way that all the fans in the stands just started dancing and jumping up and down during the game to a song. The national anthem randomly just belts out at points as well. The Irish crowd was a lot different. It was a bit more boisterous, a bit more vocal, I guess, from I don't know, just from what you'd expect from like a UK sports fan. But this was more of a musical. It felt more theatrical.
There you go.
And it was awesome to watch, and it was awesome to see, and the atmosphere was just sensational. There was actually a really good chunk of South African fans as well, though. I mean, when you look at what Ireland and the All Blacks had in terms of the fan split, it felt like every one All Blacks fan you'd find there'd be 20 to 25 Irish fans.
Felt like that, didn't it?
This was more like, I don't know, 7-1 it felt like. So there was a really good turnout from the South African fans. But just a sensational game. And to say that the 2 World Cup games that I've ever been to, even if for some catastrophic reason we can't go to any more at this tournament, I'm pretty damn happy that those were the 2 that I saw. And very different games. The New Zealand-Ireland one was a lot more physically intense, it felt, whereas this one was a bit more open, a lot more in-game kicking, especially from the French, but 2 just sensational games. And I didn't actually think the atmosphere makes sense when you think about it, but I didn't actually think the atmosphere could really be topped after the All Blacks Ireland
Yeah,
game.
it's pretty
and
good,
then
yeah.
it just went to another level.
Well, I mean, it's because the Kiwis are involved, because the All Blacks are involved. There's a sense of euphoria there as well. I mean, we have that. I mean, that's our patriotism coming out, and that's natural. Last night, it was 2 other countries bringing that. And what Lachlan means is to whether or not we get back inside that stadium. We're non-rights holders, people. So because we're not broadcasters, when it comes to allocating tickets for media, we are down the list. We go into a ballot.
For non-All Blacks games, yeah.
Yeah, so, it just means that, our names are in the hat, and we're waiting over the next 24, 36 hours to find out. The game last night, high intensity, just like it was the night before. A lot of talk about these two being the 4 best teams in the world. And I think when you looked at the quality of the quarterfinals, that is undeniable. I mean, you can't debate that. And anyone that does, I mean, I don't know what games you are watching, but there's a level that New Zealand and Ireland achieved that Wales and Argentina didn't. There was a level last night that France and South Africa went to that England and Fiji, no disrespect, but that's just the reality of it, right?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's a overbeaten, overstated topic, and so there's no point discussing it. But the draw is such, and it's a real shame that it's that way. That the 4 best teams, clearly the 4 best teams in the world, I think, because the 2 that I didn't think would win actually beat the other 2, in New Zealand and South Africa beating Ireland and France respectively. It's a real shame that 2 of those teams had to be knocked out in the quarterfinals. And I'll say this: I didn't see a huge amount really of either game. The other ones, Wales, Argentina, I saw actually a bit more of England and Fiji. But just the intensity, there was a physical intensity about us versus Ireland, and there was that in South Africa, France. I don't think to as much of a degree that just wasn't replicated in those other 2 games, and especially in the England-Fiji game. Even though Fiji came back and drew it up, I didn't think they'd win. I never thought they'd win that game. I just thought that England would find a way, they'd play a bit more of a smarter style of rugby, and they won the game thanks to an Owen Farrell drop goal, and I think they added a penalty goal after that.
For insurance, yeah.
In sort of strategic rugby manner, if that makes sense. So there was 2 clear Titanic quarterfinals, and those were the ones that we saw in Paris.
Now that the French are out, it does change things. Look, since we've been here in Paris and where we're living in the 10th arrondissement, you wouldn't know really that there's a Rugby World Cup on. Well, we didn't know until it got closer to the All Blacks versus Ireland. Then all of a sudden you just start seeing green all around the place. And so this is kind of, it's not in the central city. It's called or classified as a bit of a bohemian area of town. Hotel that we're in is a 3-star. So it's, that's the kind of accommodation around the area. So a lot of fans that are coming in, I mean, this is what they can afford. It's, Paris is a rather expensive city. Long-winded way of saying, look, now we are approaching these 2 semi-finals and the French aren't involved. I just got the feeling that if France had beaten South Africa last night, that you would have seen rugby all over the streets. We're getting a little bit in the subway stations and things like that, but we would have seen French jerseys everywhere. And I think the French nation would have just really picked itself up and started to come out in force. So has the balloon been pricked at all? When we walked to the stadium last night with 80,000 people there and the Allez les Bleus, which is just being chanted, and the French had taken over because it's their town, of course. We're not going to see that now. We're going to see a foreign invasion. I just think it does change things.
Well, I think it does, but I at least not from what I've seen so far. So since we arrived last Sunday, so a little over a week ago now, from then up until right now, it didn't really feel like the city was getting behind the World Cup in the same way that you'd maybe expect Auckland to, or you'd expect somewhere like Dublin to, if Ireland were hosting it, for example. Not to say there weren't great supporters, like the French supporters you're talking about, dressed so well, great costumes, they're vocal, they're chanting and singing, the streets around Stade de France were flooded. But that was the only place we really saw it. When we were walking around the garden all before boarding the train, there's a lot of cafes and whatnot. I didn't see a huge amount of French jerseys. I didn't see a huge amount of people on the streets chanting and clapping. Maybe we were simply in the wrong part of town to see that, but I didn't see a lot of that. And so it does prick the balloon in the sense that at the games it won't be the same. And obviously for the home fans, it's unfortunate. For a team as well that had been building to this World Cup. I think they got the hosting rights maybe about 5, 6, 7 years ago around there. And it was circled on their calendar. The way that the under-20s, under-23 or whatever, the junior French sides had won the last about 2 or 3 World Cups. All of that great talent now coming through. they are. This was the one for them to finally break their duck. I mean, there's obviously people saying the same about Ireland, and obviously people saying probably something similar about the All Blacks getting revenge after not winning it last time. But it felt like France at least would be in the semis. They'd be in contention when it got to the back end of the tournament. And so it is a shame in a sense, and it obviously sucks for the home fans. But I don't know. That's also just part of the tournament. There'll still be great support. There's great travelling fans from South Africa. There will be a lot of English fans flooding into Paris in the next couple of days. And I think there'll be a good turnout from the All Blacks fans. Same with Argentina. So, I mean, it's a bit like maybe the last World Cup. Japan were knocked out in the quarterfinals, and you'd know this better than me. I can only assume that the country still did well and got behind the tournament.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So, it's the nature of knockout sport.
Refereeing performance last night. The French captain Dupont has had a fair bit to say about Ben O'Keefe. There is incidents during the game. The first one was the deliberate, I thought it was a deliberate knock-on. Apparently, it would knock back where we were sitting. It looked as though it was a knock-on. That deserves a yellow card every day of the week. It's not a penalty try, but, for South Africa to get the ball back then, and France were really in the ascendancy. This was very early in the game. That was 7-0. I thought that was a shocker. I thought that the French were going to score then. That should have been 14-0. There was the Ebenet's yellow card, which could have been a red card.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. There was also the conversion charge down, which is a monumental part of the game. But just before we even get to that one, Ben O'Keefe and his performance, after listening to Justin, where Justin actually gave him a pretty good rating.
Yeah, there were two or three really pretty poor controversial calls. The Edsmith one, absolutely. When I saw it, I thought it went back initially, but that was sort of in person and live, and I wasn't looking at a screen. And then when they replayed it, it went forward.
Well, it's obvious, mate.
And then they've got a linesman right there. And
who's doing nothing.
And Ben O'Keefe is in pretty close proximity. And so that should be a yellow card penalty, not a penalty try. So that changes or avoids changing the game, if that makes sense. Then there was the...
And you've got to remember South Africa scored just after that.
Yeah, off a ball.
So you go from 10-0 to 7-all. So, I mean, these are moments in games. These are moments in games. I'm not, so we have to discuss these. The yellow card... that didn't get upgraded to a red. That says to me, after watching Wales versus Argentina as well, that there has been a directive from World Rugby that the referees have been told, because during the group stages, that would have been a red card.
Yeah.
Anything we've seen over the last 2 years in World Rugby, that is a red card. So what has changed? Something has.
Well, I'd say they've just told the referees not to be maybe so quick to the point with certain calls, and the TMO as well, and not wanting something like a red card to affect the complexity of the game.
Yeah.
Because the moment that someone gets a red card, and we saw this in the All Blacks Twickenham match, that as much as we were just absolutely destroyed then, the moment you get a red card, it completely changes the game.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, England were different in their opening game against Argentina. But
they're one of the very few teams, and you can actually list them on one hand, who have won a game of rugby down to 14 men.
Also Argentina were
it doesn't
game, so.
happen that often. And I'm sure that in terms of the spectacle, with the whole world watching these massive quarterfinal games, World Rugby, they know they're under criticism about the complexity of the rules, the interference of the TMO. It just feels to me, you add all of this together, and what, is it a bizarre coincidence that these incidents aren't getting red at this time of this tournament?
There's still part of me that looks at it and thinks, at least with the Edsmith situation, that, well, it's accidental, the contact, and I don't like the idea of someone being sent off for something where they haven't actually gone out of their way to try and do it. There was the call that I really liked that Ben O'Keefe made, actually, that when Faf de Klerk passed it back into a French player who was in an offside position.
You're right.
And I can only guess he pretty much said this to Faf, that, no, I know what you're doing. You're doing this on purpose.
You're trying
to try
to
and milk
milk a penalty, yeah.
So no.
But that's common sense refereeing.
Yeah, well, it's common sense,
that's what
exactly.
we want from the referee. We want the referee who has the best view and position in the house. Let's not forget that. We all sit there on TV. The commentators sit there on TV. We all think that we know and we can see better. That guy's on the ground right there feeling the game. He knew what de Klerk was doing. De Klerk was trying to milk a penalty, and I thought his decision was right. Now, if you read the actual letter of the law is probably that's a penalty.
Yeah.
But what you want from your referee is to feel the flow of the game. So, again, praise Ben O'Keefe for that. Look, the guy copped it like a chook after the Super Rugby final, which was ridiculous and unfair, and that the calls that he made in that. I mean, if you remember, the Chiefs got a yellow. They actually got away with one yellow to Antonina Brown, which probably should have been a red during that game. Could easily have been a red. And again, when O'Keefe's making these calls, people, there's, the majority of the 80,000 crowd are just giving it to him.
They really are.
So there's
nowhere to hide.
You're the guy on the ground. You've got to ignore all of that. You know what it's like in a football game? That as soon as any ball goes near any defender in the area, the whole crowd behind the goal, penalty!
Yeah.
And as a person, your natural human reaction is probably, oh, was it? And so the referee's got to divorce all of that out of their mind. With no help at all from the linos, who may as well not be there. They might as well put their flags back in their tight panted pockets because they don't actually do anything. So I think, on balance, on fairness, I think when you reflect on it, O'Keefe did well, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, another thing as well, I didn't like how Antoine Dupont, the French captain, did this. Is after the match, he's complaining about the ref, and he sort of prefaced what he said by saying, "Look, I don't want to moan too much and blah blah blah," but which means I am going to moan. Yeah, so there's no point saying it. Look, the Etzbeth one, which I think is the most contentious one, the knocking of the ball down, that happened in the first half. It happened, I think, within 10-15 minutes of it. And it was 7-0 at the time to France. Now, sure, if things go to plan in terms of what should have been called, it should be 10-0 to France, then there's a restart of the game after that. Now, there's nothing to say that South Africa don't turn it up a gear, become a lot more spirited, and there's a lot more heart in the way they play, and they hit the French hard and throw them a few right hooks and whatnot, that they then managed to take the lead and still go on to win the game.
True.
There was the moment where the French player had a conversion on the sideline that Cheslin Colby
is just ridiculous. Down. How many times do you see that in any game of rugby, let alone a game of this magnitude? You've got 60 seconds, mate, to put it on the tee and kick it. Yeah. And he fannied around long enough. And those 2 points, it was a difficult conversion, but those 2 points, there was only 1 point in the game. 26-25 could have been. And also, if France had the lead in those opening moments. So, all right, next topic, Argentina versus England. The feeling is already that these two teams have been written off. And we'll close out on this because what you're about to hear after this is the press conference involving Dane Coles and Ethan de Groot. And Ethan de Groot doesn't really say a lot. With all due respect, he didn't get asked a lot as well. But a lot of the questions were to Dane Coles about the playing of Argentina, taking it back. We put this into Jason Ryan, taking it back to last year when after we won in Joburg, we thought the All Blacks were on a reset after getting belted in Elspeth, losing the series to Ireland. All of a sudden we were back, we were cohesive, coordinated. This was a great All Black team again. What happened in the very next game that we played?
We lost to Argentina. We
lost to, and in one of the most muddled, fumbling, bumbling, stumbling All Black performances ever. And Coles references it. That was the worst game under Foster, no question. I remember that game thinking, how the hell are we losing this game to these guys?
How do you go from that in Johannesburg
2 weeks later to this? So let's just keep that in mind and bear that in mind. And also, Michael Cheika has got a bit of Eddie Jones made about him, and he's got something up his sleeve. So there's that to make mention of. The All Blacks are overwhelming favourites. I mean, okay, we can't get away from that. But as far as England and South Africa go, this is a repeat of the 2019 final, when again the Poms went in there after belting us, and they probably thought they were going to win that final. South Africa upset them on the day. A number of players from both sides are going to reconvene again this Saturday night in Paris, Sunday morning New Zealand time, for that. So, as much as England have looked awful throughout this tournament, again, do they have another performance in them that could actually do what they did in Tokyo to South Africa? Of course they could. They probably won't, but you've got to say they have a chance, don't they?
The last time that England had a really, really, really good performance, aside from that opening game of the World Cup against Argentina, you've got to go back to probably the series where they played Australia last year. Yeah. In Australia, because they weren't that great in the what they describe as the autumn series at the end of the year.
Well, the last 20 minutes at Twickers, they weren't bad against us. They came back.
But it's 20 minutes.
Or did we lose that in the last 20 minutes? Okay. Six Nations, they weren't good.
So we're yet to see... No, they were awful. I mean, I think France put 50 on them in the Six Nations. So that we haven't seen a really brilliant England performance in a long time. Probably not since actually 2019, to be fair. And they have it in them because they have the talent. They've got a massive chunk of the team still there from that 2019 one that killed us in that semi-final and probably should have beaten South Africa. So do South Africa. So, and they're the kind of team that you're kind of waiting for them to go out there and really have a huge game. And I know that's maybe a bit of a silly thing to say when they've been so ordinary for about a year now. They've got a head coach who seems to just have such a standard, simple, and pretty boring sort of coaching style and play style for his team. But in saying that, I mean, I can't imagine that anyone would look at an England team and just kind of just laugh them off.
Well, no, rather you can't. At your peril, mate. At your peril. So we've got two big semi-finals coming up this weekend, and again, you've got overwhelming favourites. But this is knockout rugby. This is a World Cup, and that's the greatest thing about being here. We still don't know.
Devlin.
What is this?
A center for ants?
The platform.